From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County, JOCO Community Radio.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Let's be honest. Wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. If you carry a wheelchair in your car to take care of a loved one, you know how hard it is getting that clunky, old-style wheelchair in and out of your car. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. At 13 pounds, it's the world's lightest wheelchair. It folds in seconds and fits neatly in your trunk, backseat, or closet, so you can take it everywhere. And it's only available right here. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value, yours free. The Feather Chair. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to JOCO Community Radio.
Well, good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back to Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. We are wonderful and blessed to have such a beautiful day outside. And thank God it's only 100 degrees instead of 110. Today we are going to be discussing something that kind of hits close to home and near and dear to me. It is an issue that has been going on for far too long in this country, and something that is, frankly, should not be going on, should not be happening, and that is the issue of communist infiltration. And believe me, I I have read into it, looked into it several times over the last few years when I first started getting into Cold War and politics of the sort. And communist infiltration has been occurring in this country for a very long time. And that is not to say that we we have necessarily got some grand conspiracy going on, but it is happening and it's right under our noses, and something that has frankly got many Americans distraught. It's got me very upset, and that we have politicians who allow this to happen, who watch this happen, who allow our foreign aggressors, our foreign enemies, to come in and make changes to the American system. So I have a very broad topic today. I'm going to be covering, namely, a few articles about this issue. One of them comes from, and I'm just going to go ahead and list these off with the dates and the people that had authored these, just so if you want to look them up while we're going over them, you can. A Politico report, Chinese funded institutes on U.S. college campuses condemned in U.S. Senate report by Benjamin Vermund, Wermund, from February of 2019, still fairly recent. One by NPR, the National Propaganda and Research Association, or National Public Radio. Legally, I have to say that is a parody, and I don't mean anything by it. China is buying up more U.S. farmland. Some lawmakers consider that a security threat, by Rachel Treisman from March 1st of 2023, this year. One report called Little Red Classrooms, China's Infiltration of American K-12 Schools, which is the longest report I have here. It was published July 26th of this year, so we're blessed by God that it's still up on the internet. Another one from the Washington Times. Biden urged communist China infiltration as vice president, by Rowan Scarborough, March 23rd of this year. And another one by the Financial Times. Canada freezes activity at China's World Bank after infiltration claims, by Joe Lei in Beijing, June 14th of this year. Now, these aren't going to be the only reports that I cover today. I have something a little bit more meaningful, and that is from Marxist.org, the actual current communist goals as permitted on this website. It says an extension of remarks by the Honorable A.S. Herlong, Jr. of Florida in the House of Representatives. These goals were actually presented to the House of Representatives Thursday, January 10th, the year of our Lord, 1963. So let's go ahead and just skip right into the history of this. And there is a report in here that hits kind of close to me, and that is this one by, I don't have the source here, but it's McCarthyism and the Red Scare, the Second Communism Hysteria Phenomenon, by Amy Hayes, a Bachelor of Art recipient with history with an English minor. I'm going to put this out there. I'm a big researcher into Senator Joseph McCarthy, and I think he was an excellent public servant and an excellent person who had a heart for getting this country straight. Now, I will disclose that I don't agree with all of his statements. I don't agree with everything that he believes or everything that he pursued, nor do I agree with all of the methods that he had at his disposal. But we're kind of going to get into the psychology, a little bit of why Joe McCarthy did the way he did, and this is all from my interpretation, my interpretation of what I've looked into. So, to begin, Joe McCarthy, for those who don't know, was a senator who was very popular up until 1954 for the McCarthy era, or as many remember as the second or third Red Scare that hit this country after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1917, when Russia had exited themselves from the First World War and actually had a revolution between the Bolsheviks and what they considered the aristocratic class, the rulers, Tsar Nicholas II, the Romanov family murders, who Boris Yeltsin actually became big in the Russian Communist Party for burning the Romanov house, getting rid of any evidence of murder. And that is how he became big, was after his construction team was contracted by the Soviet government to burn down the Romanov house, essentially getting rid of the last trace of their monarchical history. So Joe McCarthy has had a lot of misrepresentation. He has had a lot of bad representation in the American media. And judging by what we've seen from the American media on Democrats and Republicans alike, with people like the gentleman from Wisconsin who had tried to form numerous blue ribbon committees to investigate independently from the federal government and the Congress. Paul Wellstone, many might remember his name. Many might have been big fans of his in his day, as well as Donald Trump. Now, these two gentlemen from two different areas, one a traditional liberal and one a staunch conservative, have both had terrible representation by the media when all they were trying to do was provide an exigence to the American people that they are doing what is best, what is in the interest, and hopefully bring something constructive to the American government. Now, given that I had disclosed that I don't agree with McCarthy on everything, I've read his book. I've got his autograph sitting at home. He is a big influence on how American politics has developed today and why it is the way it is. And frankly, if you look at anything that I have told other people or said, I'm a big fan of Joe McCarthy. And that's not to sit here and say that I agreed with his methods necessarily, but I'm a big fan of a man who has been defamed, defrauded, shamed, shunned, uh, exited, and if you want to use the religious term, excommunicated from the American way of life, because those who are in the establishment today were the same as it was back then. They didn't want people routing out certain things, and that is just the way the dice has been rolled. But without getting too far into the aspect of conspiring and all of these things that we don't really necessarily have proof for, I'm going to get into some reports here. So we're going to start with the NPR article. China is buying up more U.S. farmland. Some lawmakers consider that a threat. It doesn't take a genius to look at NPR's title and say, well, maybe having your mortal enemy, the enemy that has stood against the American way of life, the way that America has been for almost 100 years now. We've had the scourge and the leech that is communism constantly sucking the blood of this country and running our youth dry of inspiration and possibly the atonement for America's future and the solution to our problems by indoctrinating our youth into thinking that what they are is more important than who they are, and what they believe in science is more important than what they believe in moral value. And we have seen this through the oaths that our doctors now take. I believe it was Columbia University's graduating class took out everything about the statement that doctors have to take, the Hippocratic Oath, and have now replaced it with a sort of social justice lingo that replaces everything about the career and the necessity of having a doctor, to forcing Americans into this category of being a germane communist. So the NPR report goes in and says, over the course of 3 hours of this Senate hearing, they made a case for how Chinese Communist Party has gained power over global markets and endangered American interests. A gentleman went up and testified, it's necessary to avoid xenophobia, anti-Chinese or Asian stereotyping at all costs. Notably, the opening statements were disrupted by anti-war protesters holding signs including China is not our enemy and stop Asian hate, which, if we know anything about communists, they're hell-bent on dividing people based on race, based on the color of their skin, because you cannot accomplish anything in this country once communism has taken root and taken hold of our government and every last thing that we hold dear to our hearts in this constitutional republic that our wonderful founders and the hand of God had blessed us with. There is not going to be any worth in an individual for their race, for their ethnicity, for their gender. All of these things are created to divide the American public, today by somebody who obviously wants to unite us under a state system. And we saw this in Russia, we saw this in China, we saw this in Laos, Cambodia, Venezuela, Cuba. We had people killing each other in these countries. And as Henry Tyke had mentioned a few weeks back, the same thing had happened in Rhodesia, the last true constitutional republic in South Africa, and mainly all of Africa for that matter. And we bring in these terms like post-colonialism, imperialism. Well, the true post-colonial and the true imperial power is communism. They seek nothing than to subvert the rights of men, regardless of how they were created on the inside rather than the outside. They seek to subvert the intelligence of those. If anybody has listened to the Johnny Freedom song, Ain't I Right? He says he names a numerous amount of people, religious leaders, intellectual leaders, a priest, a nun, a rabbi, and an educated man have listened and been taken in by you. Your concern is not to help the people. He goes into the song. I urge you to listen to it. It's called Ain't I Right by Johnny Freedom, and it was written by Marty Robbins under an assumed alias in the time of Vietnam, when he couldn't necessarily say that he was pro-Vietnam War. But go listen to it. It goes on to say that food security is national security, and I think we've seen Russia was able to exercise undue influence over Europe because of the war in Ukraine. It goes on to say there's no small amount of food we're talking about. In recent years, the Chinese Communist Party has increased their holdings of foreign farmland by 1,000%. They own 1,300 agricultural processing facilities outside of China, and that number is growing rapidly. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist. In today's terms, it might, to understand that you don't want your foreign enemy, who you have a sworn vengeance or a vendetta against, to have land in your own country. And it seems like our politicians would have been smart enough to figure this out years ago and say, well, maybe we need to pass a law that bans foreign investors from X countries, or ban certain investors that are state-backed firms from communist China from buying up farmland. It doesn't take a genius to figure that out. So we're moving on to another article. I'm just going to skip through these real quick because I really want to get on to the Marxist.org one. So Canada freezes activity at China's World Bank after the infiltration claims. Basically, and I'm just going to read one thing out of this. The gentleman who was testifying before the media here said, these people are like an invisible government inside the bank, and this is what I can't be a part of, Pickard told the Financial Times from Tokyo. I don't want to be a useful idiot. So we have these Chinese, I'm just going to say communists, because it doesn't matter what country you're from. When we have communists infiltrating the American economy and those of our allies, it is a staunch threat to liberty in every one of those countries, because as we know with vines, anybody who has been in Burleson and has seen the way that the lawns grow here, if you don't get out there and mow them every week, even in the summer, these things will get up there. And then, you have the city who ends up coming around and finding people because your lawn's too long. That's kind of like communism. And it's whether you look at it as St. Augustine grass or the worst vine or some sort of strangling vine or something. When communism has something to grow and leech on, it will constantly feed off of the nutrients of, and I think a vine is a good explanation of this. The tree of liberty, as Thomas Jefferson once said, should be refreshed every generation from the blood of patriots and the blood of tyrants. It's only natural fertilizer. When we look at the tree of liberty, you have to nourish a tree. You have to keep it safe from wind. You have to tie it down in wind if it's a small tree. You have to nurture it with good nutrients, good water, good soil, good fertilizer. And so when you have a vine that is constantly sucking the nutrients out of this tree like a parasite, the tree is not going to last long. And we've seen that in every country that communism has subdued. And of course, real communism has never been tried. And thank God it hasn't. But in those countries that it did, it was a vital reason that those countries are now failed states, or score lowest on the humane website ratings for these countries that are the most humane or the freest. The World Liberty Ratings, these countries consistently place the last 10. Matter of fact, if there was a Olympics for how many of these failed states would actually succeed in a communist system, I think it would be a sitting still and hands folded contest like you'd see on The Simpsons between the Flander children. So we have another report here by Politico. Chinese funded institutes on U.S. college campuses condemned in a U.S. Senate report. The report notes the rapid growth of so-called Confucius classrooms. For those who don't know, Confucius institutes, we'll get into that in the next report, are the ways that they are subtly funding third-party groups and American schools in general to kind of bring in a new society into these schools for what these kids are learning, whether they are educated on the propagation of Chinese Communist Party values, and in general, the Comintern, as it would have been called then. Says Chinese language classes funded by the Chinese government are in more than 500 elementary, middle, and high schools in the United States. The report is the latest example of growing congressional scrutiny of Chinese involvement in the American educational system, including attempts by China and other nations to spy on and steal federally funded research in college campuses. They go on in the report to say we must have our eyes wide open on the presence of these institutes in our schools and around our youth, impressionable students, especially since they were conceived by and are funded by a Chinese government that holds and exports a much different worldview than ours. I'm not going to go through the whole rest of this, but we have to be aware of what is going on in our schools. And, these school districts might not like me mentioning this, but here is an article. I'm just going to pan it over to the other camera so you can see, and I'm going to make sure that you can see it. It's called Little Red Classrooms. For those who don't know, there is a propaganda poster back in the late 40s, early 50s that said, "How red can the little schoolhouse get?" It had a picture of a communist soldier putting a syringe inside of an American schoolhouse while the kids are out playing and injecting it with communist propaganda, which is where the title comes from, the Little Red Schoolhouse, Little Red Classrooms. Matter of fact, I'm going to pull it up and show you a picture of this. It is a very pressing picture, I think. So I'm just going to pull it up here real quick. And this is it. I don't know if you can see it on my laptop. I apologize. I should have it ready there. It says, "How red is the Little Red Schoolhouse?" And you move down and you can see the soldier here pointing the syringe into the school. It says organized communist propaganda. And all the kids are out playing. It says it's high time American parents know the facts. And somehow we've gone 70 years since this poster was created, and somehow Americans still don't know the facts. So that is what the purpose of this show, that's what the purpose of this today is, to give information into what is going on and how Joseph McCarthy, the honorable senator, might have been right, in fact. Here on the first page, it says they have bought into classrooms in Annapolis, close to Buckley Air Force Base, Dover Air Force Base, Lackland Air Force Base, Langley. All of these were military installations, or currently are, next to Confucius Institute-funded schools. Matter of fact, it says in Texas, the Confucius Institute at the University of blank, I'm not going to finish that because I don't want to get hounded on, in Dallas, 2020 gave Highland Park Independent School District a $20,000 grant for the operation and supplies of the Chinese courses. These funds were also to be used by a district staff member to travel to China for educational purposes. The Chinese government's effort to forge ties in American schools through its Ministry of Education is one facet of Chinese Communist Party's broader soft power strategies. He goes on to say, U.S.-based organizations, namely the College Board, who gives all of the PSATs, all of these practice college exams, the ACT that they give in high schools, who actually have many contracts here locally. The College Board in Asia Society worked with Hanbon, which is somebody in this report, to tailor Chinese culture and language immersion programs in U.S. schools. They also collaborated on funding Confucius programs in universities K-12 and up. we go a few more pages back to the Texas portion. And I actually want people to look this up if you can. Little Red Classrooms, China's Infiltration of American K-12 Schools, published July 26th of 2023, says, on September 7th, 2022, the Highland Park Independent School District received $12,369.93 in grant funding from the International Leadership of Texas Global for the purposes of supporting Highland Park Middle School's language other than English department Chinese course curriculum. In addition, the middle school grant the district received of $2,004.94 in funding from the International Leadership Texas Global in support of the Chinese course curriculum. Now, I have nothing against teaching foreign languages in schools, but when we are getting to the point where those programs are not being looked over by our state educators, in this case, the Texas Department of Education, the educational agency, and we really need to be electing school board officials who are willing, even if these programs are allowed to persist and teach foreign language to our kids, which Mandarin and traditional Chinese are going to be necessary languages in the future, because with the way that things are going, and people may argue with me over this, look at it this way: we have to have future diplomats who speak that language to go to U.S. embassies, to go deter war, to get rid of the threat of war, and hopefully someday to get rid of nuclear weapons. And so these districts, if you're going to have these programs, Highland Park and others, which it's not even that, there's 500 schools in the United States from K-12 that they have funded, according to this report. We are going at some point to have to elect school board leaders, state education leaders, Department of Education leaders who are against infiltration of propaganda into our schools. I don't care whether it's communist. I don't care whether it's fascist. I don't care whether it's extremist. I don't even care what religion it comes from. If we have schools from state-backed programs, not even from the United States, that are teaching our kids what to think and how to think, which I've often told people, elementary school teaches you the patterns, high school takes away your thought process, and some colleges in this country replace that thought process by teaching you how to think the way that they want you to think, not necessarily what to think, but what to think naturally would come later. I would reckon after how to think. If you think divisiveness, you're going to believe divisiveness. If you're going to be taught racism, you're going to believe that racism persists. If you're going to be taught that communism is a global savior and we need to have a communist order to move into this country to liberate the masses from the threat of racism and nationalism and all of these things, that is what the youth are going to believe. They are very, very much based on patterns, very much based on putting two and two together. As much as people don't think they are very good at putting patterns and recognizing things together. And when we have a pattern of education in this country that is foreign propaganda, that is teaching kids, oh, you can only elect a certain person, you can only believe in a certain party, you can only hold an affiliation to a certain party. Well, naturally, when you have, and I'm not going to associate Democrats with communists, because they're two different systems. There are good-hearted Democrats out there who are sick of the way things are going and sick of who is running the party. There are Republicans that are naturally the same way, but communists, we all need to come together and realize, is an enemy to this state and an enemy to our country. Matter of fact, I don't have the report on me right now, but USA Today put out suspected Chinese spies disguised as tourists try to infiltrate Alaskan military bases by Tom Vandenbroek, published at 5/12, May 31st of this year. Matter of fact, the Los Angeles Times, that had such a hard view here in their opinion piece, if we can find it up for you again. It was here somewhere. They were talking about the dangers of communist infiltration, yet they come in and say loyalty oaths failed the test of democracy. Well, if loyalty oaths fail the test of democracy, then so does the Pledge of Allegiance, because there is nothing wrong, there is nothing traitorous about pledging allegiance to your country. Matter of fact, President Eisenhower said that he had purposely put the one nation under God in there, not only to deter communism, but as he said, to renew the faith in our country, renew the dedication of this nation to our religious morals, whether you have religious beliefs that stem from a religion or you hold religious beliefs that stem from morality and the ethics of being a good human being and holding a value for life and a value for your fellow man. There is absolutely nothing wrong with pledging allegiance to your country, nor taking a loyalty oath that you're going to be true to your country, lest you fall into judicial harm. So we're going to go to a commercial break. When we get right back, we're going to go to Marxist.org and look at the world communist goals here that were presented January 10th, 1963. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
If you are trying to quit drinking or doing too many drugs, listen to me. You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program may be covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. 877-247-1581. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County, and welcome back to Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. Thank you for sticking with us if you watched all that first half. I want to give a shout-out to our listeners out of state and a shout-out to those who are listening in the community. Because of you and your generosity and viewership, we are able to keep educating the youth in the minds of our country. And as our glorious Savior saves one soul at a time, it's up to those who have the knowledge to share it to save one mind at a time. First, I'd like to say Joco Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas, and is live 24/7 on the TuneIn Radio Network. TuneInJoco.com is the place to find all the best ways to listen and watch, and the station app is also available for free on both Android and Apple devices. Simply search your store. Check out our lineup and more at JocoCommunityRadio.com. This episode more brought to you by Next Level Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to your local Texas sales rep at 844-839-4245. That's 844-839-4245. Be sure to dress your arms in more at thetiffy.com. Once again, I want to extend the welcome hand of our show and our staff to those in the community. If you're a local business, a local leader, a local small business, we would prefer small businesses. If you would like to sponsor the show and continue the education of the minds of the youth and those in our country, and what truly brings our elders and our youth together is really education. When you get down to family stories and dinner table discussions, those are what are passed down through generations, whether it be what it was like in my day versus kids these days, or whether it be elders teaching their children the hardships that they had fought through in the Great Depression, World War I, World War II, and Korea, Vietnam. It is nothing like education and stories that are passed down, warnings from the past for the present, so that we can have a better future that truly matter to this country. If you are somebody who thinks that way, somebody who wants to invest in the future and not just leave your money to the publisher's clearinghouse when you want to have a legacy, I hate asking for money, but it's something that we have to do in this country to expand the market, and that's just the way it is. And I hate it that we can't have things for free that are good for the public. But if you are somebody who is willing to put in a few cents on the dollar, we would very much appreciate it. We're back with our topic today: the current communist goals. Now, this not only was published from The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen, but it was written and drafted before the United States House of Representatives in Thursday of January 10th, the year of our Lord, 1963. And I'm just going to go down the list real quick. And if you want to look it up, just current communist goals. There's 45 of them. There should be the 45 old ones, the 45 new ones, whichever one you want. I'm going to read them off. I want you as the listener to listen to this. This is actually from the Marxist.org website, their archive for all things Marxist, communist, all things Leninist, Trotskyist, Anglist. Take a listen. And I want you to think about how far we are in this detachment from true constitutional republicanism. And I don't mean the party, I mean the brilliant system that the mind of God had pinned through the finger of a man, as James Madison would put it. The author of our Constitution, a very short man, 5'4" which same height as me. So you can imagine the gentleman sitting here with me today. He probably is in spirit, and I really hope that he is, because this is something that I feel like our founders would want us to be warned of. So, communist goal number 1: U.S. acceptance of coexistence as the only alternative to atomic war. Yes, that happened with the Soviet Union. And I'm just going to go down the list here and try and help you out along the way. So we coexisted with the Soviet Union for 50 years almost. U.S. willingness to capitulate in preference by engaging in atomic war. Basically, we cease our objectives against communism by them threatening us with atomic war. That already happened. Cuban Missile Crisis, one name example. Developed the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength, getting rid of our nuclear weapons before our enemies do. That's already happening, and as we speak. Permit free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation, regardless of whether or not those items can be used for war. That already happened with the open China policy of Nixon and Carter, who only exacerbated the results of sending all of our industry overseas, and the Pacific trade agreements with Clinton. Extension of long-term loans to Russian Soviet satellites. I don't know if that ever happened. I'm not a financial expert on whether we sent loans to the Soviet Union or not, but I guarantee we probably did as aid packages. Provide American aid to all nations regardless of communist domination. More than likely. Grant recognition of Red China, admission of Red China or Communist China to the United Nations. It happened. They're on the National Security Council. Even if Russia and the United States somehow miraculously, by the will of God, come together on something, it can still be blocked by a single vote of China. So that already happened. Set up East and West Germany as separate states in spite of Khrushchev's promise in 1955 to settle the German question by free elections under supervision of the UN. Already happened. Collapsed. Prolong the conferences to ban atomic tests because the United States has agreed to suspend tests as long as negotiations are in progress. That has been happening for over 80 years now, well over almost. Here in the next decade, it'll be 80 years since we had come out with the SALT I, SALT II treaties, the nuclear disarmament treaties under Obama and the other administrations of the past. And Khrushchev did prolong the conference with Kennedy on disarmament, so it held out for 6 months, I think, after the October incident in the Cuban Missile Crisis until we finally got an understanding, which definitely played well into the communist hands, seeing that that was one of their goals. Allow all Soviet satellites individual representation in the UN. It happened after it collapsed. Promote the UN as the only hope for mankind. If its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one world government with its own independent armed forces. I don't have to comment. I don't want to go in too deep on that statement. Just ponder it a little bit. Number 12, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. That happened in 1954, coincidentally, when Eisenhower passed a law that banned, and it's still in effect, I do believe, it is illegal to be a Communist Party member in the United States. It is illegal to be a Communist Party in the United States in after 54. So do away with loyalty oaths. That was done after Truman's term. They got rid of that. Continue giving Russia access to the patents office. I don't know if that happens now. Capture one or both political parties in the United States. I'm going to leave that to you to ponder for a second. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Number 16, use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Civil liberties, unions, I don't know. That's just the statement here. So ponder that a little bit. Claiming it violates rights. Number 17, get control of the schools. Use them as transmission belts for socialism, current communist propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations. Well, when one reads this report, they can't help but be dumbfounded that Goal 17 and the report Little Red Classrooms kind of lines up the way it does. Kind of funny how that works out. It's almost like history repeats itself. As Marx would even say, first as a farce, second as a tragedy. Well, this is the second time. So, gain control of all student newspapers, number 18. 19, use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations under communist attack. Number 20, infiltrate the press, get control of book review assignments, colleges, book review assignments, editorial writing, policymaking positions, think tanks, maybe, I don't know. Gain control of key positions in the radio, TV, or motion pictures. Well, you don't have to worry about this gentleman getting bought out by the Communist Party. I'm as anti-communist as it comes. Number 20, infiltrate the press. I already said that. 21, gain control of those positions. I already said that. So those more than likely happened. Continue discrediting American culture by disregarding all forms of artistic expression. An American communist cell was told to eliminate all good sculptures from public parks, buildings, statues, and awkward, meaningless forms. So I want to ask you, the viewer, to ponder taking away our statues. Is it really because it's racist? And why else would America suddenly switch in just 20 years from thinking that Picasso, all of these brilliant paintings, the cathedrals, all of this beautiful art, and now suddenly a banana duct taped to a wall is somehow brilliant? I really saw the struggle in this guy's eyes while he was making it. So, are they taking down our statues? Are they taking bananas to walls because it is fashionable now, or is it discrediting American culture, as goal number 22 says? Control art critics and museum directors. I don't have to tell you that that is part of the apparatus of 22. Eliminate all government laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Now, I don't know if anybody has seen the pornography arguments about my son should be able to see two gentlemen doing it. My daughter should be able to see this. It's civil rights. Well, I don't know about anybody, but it sounds a lot like we're taking away the innocence of these children, and we are allowing obscenity to get in there because we're calling it free speech and free press. Now, for anybody who knows, there is a limit to free speech. Believe it or not, when you run into a movie theater and yell fire, that is a crime. You're putting the public in danger. If we've seen I-35 or I-30, I-20, there's like 4 interstates around here. In morning or afternoon traffic, I don't tell you how people are going to run out of a movie theater if you yell fire. break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography. Oh my gosh, we just discussed that. And obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. I'm going to skip down a few of these. Infiltrate the churches, eliminate prayer, that it violates the principle of separation of church and state. Number 28, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, hindrance of cooperation. I don't have to tell you that that is something that is being peddled heavily to our youth in education today. They have come up with this lie called the flexible constitution, what it would have been called in Thomas Jefferson's day was a loose constitution. There were strict and there were loose constitutionalists who supported the expansion of federal power on the loose end, or on the strict side, as Thomas Jefferson, an anti-federalist, believed. The government only serves to ensure that basic individual rights are protected under the Bill of Rights. When we remove the amendment that says those powers not reserved by the federal government or endowed to them by the Constitution or neglected by the states are reserved for the states and to the people. I don't have to tell you that we have already discredited our Constitution heavily. One thing a gentleman told me this morning was that they no longer in Texas, in most of the schools that he has been in to teach constitutional courses, uh, Mr. Sanders and I had a discussion on this a few weeks back, and he mentioned it today that schools on Constitutional Day hardly teach the Constitution as public law mandates it. And I don't have to tell any American in their right mind, Democrat or Republican, that it should already be common knowledge to teach our Constitution in public schools. Number 30, when we discredit the document, we discredit the authors. So number 30 says discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. I'm going to do a whole episode on this. I might as well, about how brilliant the minds of our founding fathers were. You don't have to get into reading one letter by Alexander Hamilton or the Federalists to look at even the Federalists who were for a central government in this country, that they had a concern for the common man. It was out of that concern of being subjugated by another monarch or a king for life that we got presented this idea of regulated government, limited power, strict constitutionalism, which followed the great hierarchical structures that were put forth centuries before by Montesquieu, by John Locke, by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, by Thomas Paine, by those in Greece. Aristotle leave no authority unquestioned. And I have to pick on Socrates a little bit. Control by philosophers. I don't think you have to be having an arts degree in philosophy to control this government. Number 31, belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the grounds that it is only a minor part of the big picture. Give more emphasis to Russian history since the communists took over. And what do we see is a heavy emphasis on globalism in our schools nowadays. You can't walk 2 steps without seeing Burleson, Highland Park. I don't know who does it, but I'm not here to accuse. I'm just here to present the idea of these schools get grants to put culture studies in there. And then when you learn the language, you learn a little bit of the culture as well. And of course, that's communism. We see the rise of globalism and internationalization within American education. So, number 32, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of that culture, education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc., to be centralized by the central government. Of course, who else would govern the slave class but the aristocrats who they said they had overthrown? And yet now we have oligarchs running Russia. We have oligarchs running the post-Soviet states. We have oligarchs running China. Well, of course, it's very easy for those former capitalist countries to have oligarchs in there because those aristocrats who are in such a high place in these corporations, you might even pull a pattern out of this. Those who had financed and bankrolled the Communist Party in these countries are not afraid to be taken out of power because it's always the middle management that gets overthrown and the blood shed upon their hands by the workers who are only a rank lower than the supermarket manager they have above them or whoever is running the show above them. It's always the man above you. It's always the boogeyman above you. And then when these billionaires in Soviet Russia, those who had financed and bankrolled the culture revolution in China, they were not scared of being taken out because they already were put in the position of bankrolling the government. They had no problem transitioning over from being controllers of the corporation to controllers of the state. And then, of course, were put into positions of high power by Mao Zedong, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Khrushchev, Yeltsin, all of these leaders, Xi Jinping, maybe. And then goes on 33, eliminate all laws or procedures with the operation of the communist apparatus. So get rid of all the laws that eliminate looking into it. I wonder why we haven't had a HUAC committee formed again, since we're so worried about people infiltrating this country, our natural enemies, the communists coming in and taking over our government, yet we don't put 2 cents forward to oversight that. Number 34, eliminate the House Committee on Un-Americans Activities. Number 35, which seems to be the way things are going right now. And I want to encourage you to look into the news about this. Discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Why would they get rid of the FBI as communists? Well, because J. Edgar Hoover and so many others were so staunchly advocated against communism that J. Edgar Hoover had no problem pulling the strings of the national intelligence apparatus to actually putting in the effort to looking for these communists who were in the federal government or outside of it. Many may remember our discussion on Oppenheimer. Well, Oppenheimer was brought in by the FBI for this exact reason. And we got 8 minutes left. I got to rush through these. Infiltrate basically big business and gain control of it. 37. 38, transfer some of the powers of arrest from police to social agencies. I wonder why we're seeing this transition to now where only social therapists and psychoanalysts are able to help patients rather than putting them in asylums or even just treating them in clinics. Why does it have to be social agencies of the state that do this? We've already seen this too with Child Protective Services, where when Matthew was in here and the gentleman, Mr. Matt Shelton, I want to give a shout out to him, freed people. His agency rescues people of child and women sex trafficking, brings them out of that into the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He had mentioned that more than half of those kids were taken from Child Protective Services. So dominate the psychiatric profession, maybe. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce, the no-fault divorce that we saw under Ronald Reagan, as well as the promiscuity that is taught in high school sex classes. It's better to be safe than to wait until marriage. Doesn't it just make you feel useless when you know somebody didn't wait for you? To know that you were not worth waiting for somebody to not have sex until they met you and you were the one for them. It really just it brings down the man. And by that I mean when a man feels that he has no longer been waited on, that he has not been waited for in the old morals of the old century, which just in my grandparents' generation was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Now we have a culture that is promoting promiscuity, pornography. All of these things are being peddled to our youth under the guise of free speech in our public schools. And now all these kids are going to go out and defame morality, defame chastity, and we're going to have to have population control at that point. The neo-Malthusians who are already saying that it is our fault for climate change. Getting off topic, but take a listen. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Well, how about anybody remember that kid who turned in his dad when they had all this January 6th stuff going on? Well, if that can happen to somebody who might have or might not have been a criminal, I'm not sure. I'm not here to judge. I'm not here to associate January 6th with anything. But if we have kids turning their parents over to Homeland Security and whatnot, it really does make you think. And, I got into thinking about this with the TikTok ban. It's not about banning that. It's about banning something else. Look into the Senate and the House bills on that. They get control of everything, technology. Now, when you get into rationalizing this idea, it's not about public safety. These people have been in there for 40 years and have had their chance at public safety. So create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition. Well, I wonder why we're peddling socialism to our youth when socialism has led to the overthrow of every country that it has leached on and sucked the blood dry from. This is not a Democrat. This is not a Republican issue. This is a common sense issue. We have a system that has killed over 150 million people in the world in the last 100 years. We have a system that subjugates people based on their race, based on whether they're feminine or masculine, whether they are Democrat or Republican. We have all of these systems, the push and pull factors that are a lot like a transform boundary of tectonic plates. So we constantly have this earthquake of built up rage in our country nowadays. We don't even like each other. I wonder why. It's easier to control people when you have 5 groups that are running around not knowing what's going on than it is to teach kids that it doesn't matter who you are, what you want to be when you grow up, what you believe in, what your character is more important than that. We don't teach kids to belong anymore, so we teach them that because they don't belong in the system, that they don't have any place in it. The only way to justify them getting in control and positions of power is to overthrow the man, and that is an evil way of thinking. And if you look into the history of communism and what they believe, Lenin threw the cross at the ground and spit upon it and said, "There is no God." His friend recorded that. It's in the memoirs by J. Edgar Hoover. If we look at the parallel between that and the rebellion in heaven, it's no strange thought to me. I've thought about this. Why is the devil always colored red? Why is communism always colored red? Why did communism have to overthrow the monarch in Russia to get power? Why did the devil have to overthrow the king in heaven, or try to at least, to get power? And thank God, God took him down, because if we look at that with communism, it's the duty of those who understand their God given rights to understand the parallels there. So, create the impression that violence and insurrection, that students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, or social problems. Overthrow all colonial governments before native populations are ready to self-government. This happened in the abject superior, the united pullout of Africa from colonial forces. Now, there are bad aspects to colonialism. Those countries did not do anything right for the natives there, and that is the one part of colonialism that I agree with in modern theory, is we didn't treat people very well back in those days, but it wasn't a social norm. You have to look at it from the view of them, to rationalize we have changed because we pay for the sins of our fathers, as the good book says, and we learn from them. So we are better now because we learned about the evils from then. But when we saw the pullout of Africa, all these countries were left in civil decay. Not one country in Africa has been better off than it was, because they weren't left with anything. You take the education, you take all these things, and you don't reinstate a system to help those countries govern themselves. Of course, they're going to turn and rely on the communist powers that give them free money and free railroads, like China in North Africa is building a high speed rail and tracks and ports. I've heard they're doing it in Argentina and wherever else, but follow the money. You'll see why they can't govern themselves. Internationalize the Panama Canal. When we get rid of Allied control over the Panama Canal, any country in the world can use it. It's easier to blockade. Repeal the Connolly Reservation, so the United States cannot prevent the World Court from seizing jurisdiction, or the Hague, as it is in Amsterdam, over domestic problems. Give the World Court jurisdiction over nations and individuals alike. I'm not here to bring in conspiracy theory. That was from Marxist.org. When we look at the communist world order, and that's what I'm going to call it, because communists will not stop until they seek the powers from every country, until they drain the life out of everybody that is living in those countries. I'm going to try and get Ted Cruz's dad on here. I know him personally. He's a wonderful, brilliant guy, wonderful pastor. The man can speak to Democrats, Republicans alike, and leave you with something to learn, something to ponder. His family had escaped Cuba, and Mr. Cruz, Rafael Cruz himself, had told me that he had been arrested and nearly killed had the aristocrat's son not vouched for his character. Luckily, he was flown out of there before he was put to death, like all of the students that were fighting for freedom were. And he had told me stories about when the communists had found these students in the country, that they would just off with them, that you had this violent revolution. And Rafael Cruz told me one thing that stuck with me was that it was young people. So I'm going to leave you with that today. Ponder those communist goals. If you haven't heard them all, go back and rewatch them. We'll see you on Tuesday of next week. We're going to try and get another good guest on here to educate our youth. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. And thank you.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godly, this is the voice of Johnson County. Joco Community